Hello, folks. Welcome to Holding On with Holder, where I talk to interesting people about interesting topics. My name is Steve Holder, and I am your host. My guest this evening is Claudia Zapata, candidate for U.S. Congress in Texas District 35 in 2022. Welcome, Claudia.
Hi everyone. Thank you for having me, Steve.
So glad to have you with me today. So tell us about your background. How would you describe yourself?
How would I describe myself? I am a loud-mouthed, very vivacious, young brown woman who has been raised by generations of strong women. And I hope to represent strong women, and especially those who raised me, in everything I do. I come from a very close-knit family. I was born in Austin, Texas, but was raised in deep South Texas, in this small town called Mission. And it is a part of the Rio Grande Valley. So shout out to my 956 area code folks. And that really shaped who I was because it is such a tight-knit community. You have to be empathetic and sympathetic with everyone that you come in contact with, just because everyone is very aware of each other's business. And so I'm actually very thankful for that because it gave me, I guess, quite a good structural foundation before I entered college and kind of jumped out and left the Valley area. And so it made me this very, like I said, loudmouth, but also at the same time, very empathetic and caring and loving individual.
Okay. So do you enjoy talking about politics?
Yes, it's one of my favorite pastimes, but I will say that my best friends, because my bestest friends in the whole wide world, and this is the part where I'm like, am I actually a secret Republican? I don't think so. My bestest friends in the whole wide world are very big conservatives, and I align as Democratic, and it gets very interesting sometimes because I think that because of where I was raised and my background, I know when to pick my fights and when to just not.
Choose your battles, right?
Yes, you have to choose them because in all honesty, I think we forget a lot of the times, when we get caught up, especially because of the pandemic, you're not going to be able to change people's minds ever. I mean, you rarely change them in person, but you sure as hell are not about to change them over the internet, like on some Facebook or Twitter thread.
I know, been there, done that. So you're running for US Congress in 2022. Why in the world would you want to do that, Claudia?
Honestly, Steve, I have no clue. I mean, I have a clue. This is what I've wanted to do my entire life. Since the age of 7, I always told everybody that I was going to be president of the United States.
Really?
And that's just been my goal my entire life. So everything that I've worked towards, um, everything that I studied in high school and college, all my extracurriculars have been leading up to this moment. I think in the sense I've done some preparation in that sense, but when it comes to why now, why now? Why do I actually feel like I'm ready now? I think that there's a lot, and I want to say, like, financially, that people don't seem to understand when someone is in the running or decides to run for office. I think the reason that we see a lot of um, either like seasoned career politicians or those who have a lot of like big money background, is because it is very hard to have a job that is not a conflict of interest, that allows you to be able to run for office. So, for example, I currently work for the state of Texas. And so I'm actually putting in my 2 weeks on Tuesday so that way for next Tuesday, so that way I can actually file with the FEC and start accepting campaign donations. But this also means that I'm not going to have a job. And on top of that, campaigning is a 24/7 thing. It's just, it is impossible to balance. I mean, I have my full-time job, I'm campaigning on the side, and then I'm also treasurer of a nonprofit. And so there's just a lot at balance. And so I feel lucky in the sense that I've been able to save up just like a tiny, tiny little bit, little meander of savings, to be able to carry me for a couple of months. And then I'm gonna really, really just like bust my butt to get some donations, in order to give myself a candidate salary, which is legal. And I'm just gonna be barely giving myself enough to just live. Like that's all I want to do is just live. Like I will donate plasma if I have to. And I think that's one of the things that people don't take into consideration when you run for office. Um, but I just, there was a point last year, um, during it was before the elections. And there was a point last year where I thought, you know what? Like I understand that we do have, democratic leadership, here in Texas, but I seem to they seem to be failing, minorities, underrepresented groups, people of color, single, parent households, um, and that's something that really affects me because I have lived in Texas 35 for majority of my life. All of my family is here, my mom, my grandma, tias, tios, primos, primas, like everybody's here. And I don't see enough legislation being authored or co-sponsored that affects those target populations. And when you look at Texas 35, the average constituent is about 30, 32 years old, has a median income of $37,000. Yet when I look at the legislation that's being authored and co-sponsored by our current representative, Congressman Lloyd Doggett, um, I don't see any sort of legislation that targets those populations
Yeah.
and that really gives them, a leg up, especially when they're, some of the most targeted populations currently, by the GOP. And so I just feel like it's time that we have accurate representation, and that we have, some, I guess, just someone who's just ready to go hard and someone who's ready to put on the boxing gloves, which I am definitely ready to fight for my community, because my community is my family. And like I said, where I was raised in the 956 in Mission, Texas, your family is your everything. And so I just see all of Texas 35 as my family, and I'm so ready to fight for them.
And isn't your district 65% Hispanic?
Yes, and
Yeah.
that was in the 2010 census. And so I'm guessing that with this new census data that is going to be released, it's going to be between somewhere to 70 to 73%
Really?
Hispanic. And on top of that, our foreign born, population, I believe, is going to be seen like increased as well. And so I really strongly think that it's time that we have, like I said, accurate representation, but most importantly, just legislation. My background is in policy. All I've ever done is policy development. So I'm usually like the person behind the rep that's like going to all of your legislative meetings, that's taking the notes, that's doing the research. And so like I have a spreadsheet ready to go with about, right now the count is like at 72 policy ideas, to where I'm like, let's just push these out as bills. What's the worst that's going to happen? Like, they're not going to get passed. I mean, obviously I would prefer to write legislation that's actually going to get passed, that gains traction, but it also doesn't hurt to just throw it out there on the table to see who buys onto it, to see, what kind of momentum it can gain, and actually let people know that you're fighting for them.
And a freshman congressperson doesn't have a lot of clout anyway. I'm sure you know that. So
Yes.
very hard to get anything passed that you put out on the table. But like you say, you don't put it out there, you don't have a chance. So
Yeah, exactly. You just kind of got to go for it. And I think a lot of the times, and I think we're seeing this huge paradigm shift in how people are looking at politicians. And there seems to be this big push from the establishment, whether no matter which side of the political spectrum you fall on, there seems to be this big push away from career politicians, establishment politics. And I happen to be on that bandwagon because I believe that establishment and career politicians play the game strategically.
yeah,
And to me, I'm like, my life and my family's lives and my family's lives and their well beings, it's not a game and it's not something that should be played strategically. We don't have, like, my mother, my grandmother, my cousins, my uncles don't have the privilege to be able to play strategically with their lives. We just kind of have to deal with the cards that we're dealt with, and we just go for it.
yeah.
And so I'm on that. I'm on that bandwagon, like I said, to try to push away from the career establishment type of politics.
Now you've done a lot of volunteer work in your district, haven't you?
Yes, I have been very, very busy when it comes to just voter registration drives, showing up at rallies, which I think people underestimate the importance of just solidarity and just showing up and being there. I've had to explain to a couple of my friends, like, hey, just come out with me. Like it's going to be painless. It's fun. You get to meet a whole bunch of other passionate individuals who remind you that the world isn't trash. And I think that's something that people, like I said, like they tend to forget that they get lost when it comes to politics and they think it's just this very strategic thing. But volunteering can actually be very addictive in the sense that you go out and you meet all of these wonderful people who are volunteering and have the same type of passion and heart that you do. And it reminds you, like, wow, like the world isn't such a bad place because there's individuals out here like this who are so selfless. And I've done a lot of food and water distribution drives, starting with like the snowpocalypse stuff that happened here in Texas, and even last year just PPE drives, COVID vaccination signups. We've walked door to door. We've held COVID vaccination drives. We plan on going door to door some more and holding some more vaccination drives, but ones that are targeted towards the minority communities, and that are culturally appropriate as well, because you have to also understand that there's this, I think a lot of people also fail to understand that just because it's made accessible to everyone doesn't mean that it's made equitable to
Yeah.
everyone. And so I'm working really hard with my nonprofit, which is the Del Valley Community Coalition, and with the Austin Latino Coalition, to try to achieve as much vaccine equity and COVID-19 pandemic response equity as possible within my district.
Now, do you know David Anderson Jr.?
Yes, yes. David and I reached out to David. Oh, it must have been a couple of months ago. I know that he's running as well. He had made his announcement in, I think, in the Bear County Democratic Facebook group, and the reactions that he was getting, it was just like over 100 comments of people just being so dismissive and so disgusting towards him.
Yeah.
Like, it upset me. And there were folks saying like, Doggett is great. He's perfect. I don't even live in his district, but I will go and knock on every door to make sure that you don't get a single vote. You don't have the right college credentials. Doggett went to law school. All you did was go to Texas State. And I was just like, oh, hell no. Y'all are like, I'm getting offended.
Yeah.
And this isn't targeted towards me. But there is no way that you are going to talk to somebody that way and disrespect their passion for their community, because running for office is a very hard thing to do. And it takes a very kind of special individual who is so caring and empathetic to be able to do so. So I reached out to him after that comment thread and I was like, hey, like I wanted to reach out to you. I know that we've been on each other's radars. Um, but I see the way that people are talking to you, and I really hope that it's not affecting you. And I really hope that you still choose to run. Like, I hope that you are taking what they say with a grain of salt, because no matter what, whoever makes it out of the primary, whether it's me or you, I will throw all of my support behind you. So yes, David and I are friends.
Oh, is Lord Doggett doing a good job?
I will say, I mean, I'm gonna have to say no. And that's why I'm challenging him. And I think that's why David is also challenging him as well. And the
He's
fact,
Democrat, right?
yes, and I mean, and the fact that we're both young people of color coming from majority, minority areas within his district who are saying, "Hey, like, you know, what actually have you done?" I think even that's enough. I think that speaks very loudly, because there's evidently and obviously some very big issues. The way that I see it is that Doggett's current supporters all tend to be skew a little older, skew a little whiter. Um, and for me, I have no problem with Doggett representing um, those constituents. I have no issues whatsoever. However, when your district is, like we discussed earlier, 65 to maybe now 70 to 73% Latino, with the average age being between 27 and 35, 36, average income being $37,000 a year, maybe you aren't the best representative for this specific district. And so that's how I feel
Is he running
about
for
Doggett.
re-election?
Is he up for reelection? Yes. And so I believe that myself and David Anderson Jr. are going to be primarying him. Now, depending, I know that the census data is barely being released, so redistricting may change up the way that Texas 35 looks. But what I have told folks and what I'm going to stick to is, no matter what, I aim to represent the eastern parts of Central Texas, as they are heavily minority. That's where all of my family is located. That's where we have healthcare deserts, food deserts, infrastructure is lacking, poor water infrastructure, if you can believe it. It's just it's terrible. And so that's the area of Central Texas that I aim to represent.
So what do you think the minimum wage should be?
I mean, at minimum, $15 an hour. I know that if we were talking about, you know, in comparison with like inflation and rising costs of living, I believe that number would be a lot higher. And so that's why one of my platform points is to establish a national cost of living index, solely because I feel that that is a basis that is used, and that can be used to affect a lot of policy and legislation, you know, all like down to the local and county level as well. And so I just feel like there's a lot of research organizations and different colleges who have performed studies and research to have somewhat of a guess of what the um, like I said, what the cost of living index is, but it varies so much. And I would like to open up just a giant project, and have that be like at a national level, at a federal database, for politicians, for researchers, for individuals to be able to go in and look at, so that way when we're drafting policy, when it comes to should we get rid of tipped wages, what type of housing assistance should we provide, how should we fairly pay teachers, how do we address that, I think we need that basis, and having a national cost of living index, I think, sets the foundation for that.
So are you talking about like a UBI?
I don't know if I would necessarily say a universal basic income. I think in the sense, I want to establish a foundation in which people can make better estimated and more accurate guesses towards that. So for example, if the national cost of living index that I'm proposing suggests that a UBI is the way to go, based on the data, like I am a very, very big data driven, a decision making type of person. So while a lot of what I understand is from like my experiences, and I don't underestimate the strength of just having lived through these experiences, I also turn to the data. And so if I can have the national cost of living index provide me that key data to be able to make better decisions about whether UBI is going to be a extraordinarily beneficial thing, then that's what I want to pursue. And so if UBI is the way to go, then I'm not one to fight it. I definitely think that we have opened the path for that with the child tax credit, that kind of, and I think people might have missed that, but there's a little a segment within that child tax credit update that was recently put out, that specifies like on a reoccurring basis, and a lot of people who are very pro universal basic income were thinking and have noticed like, hey, that actually means like on a recurring basis, which could be like monthly, quarterly, whatever it is, that we're going to continue, not just during this pandemic, but period, we're going to continue providing families assistance for their children, which is a very exciting, I think, feature of that new child tax credit policy.
Yeah. Now, so your governor is Greg Abbott, correct? He's a Republican.
Yes.
Do you and him agree on anything?
Our love for Texas, the our love for Texas, we go about it completely separate ways. But I think, I mean, I Lord help us. I don't understand what it is that some folks have against um just poor people. Just I mean, that's the way that it feels though. It's just like, I mean, at this point, I can't say that it's even just, I mean, I think there is like a lot of target to like minority populations, but I feel like the bigger overarching category is just poor folks. Like, folks who struggle to make $50,000 a year, struggle to make $40,000 a year, which to some people listening to this, they may be like, oh, like that should be easy. No, y'all. I mean, I work for the state of Texas, and I'm barely making it. And that's supposed to be like a really, safeguarded, benefit friendly, well-paying job, or considered to be here in Texas. And so I just think, it's Abbott's time to go. It was his time to go a long time ago. And so I think whoever the nominee is, whether that's Bethel, whether that's McConaughey, I'm just like, just anyone, anyone else at this point that aligns more with humanity and just being empathetic and caring and kind. Just please.
So do you support labor unions?
Yes, yes. I am very active with Sunrise Movement, the Central Texas Our Revolution chapter as well, along with the Austin, Texas Democratic Socialists of America chapter, the Texas Service Industry Coalition, teachers unions as well. I'm a big, I believe that we need to have protections set in place because a lot of the exploitation that we as politicians want to address happens in these private big corporations, and there's only so much that we can do as politicians to write legislation that specifically protects those individuals, because it really the way that I see it, and because like I have family members who, are factory workers, whether it's like in the Amazon warehouses or like with Walmart, a lot of the exploitation that happens on the floor is something that you'll only understand and see if you're on the floor and if you're out there. And so I strongly believe that we need to empower labor unions to be able to strengthen within the actual areas where it's occurring. And so, like, I believe that, like, for example, like Tesla, I believe should be, I think that they were just proven to be like union busters a couple of, I don't know if it was like a month ago or a couple of weeks ago, but uh, I strongly believe because they specifically opened up a site here, the Giga Texas factory within Texas District 35. I am very, very um, pro union. And I think that we need to have a representative, a congresswoman who is going to be very pro union and see that Amazon and Tesla are looking at the areas within our district in Texas 35 because of the cheap land and how close it is to major cities such as San Antonio and Austin. And and a congresswoman who's going to protect those areas as well, because we want to welcome that, but we also want to make sure that we protect the individuals who are living here.
So do you think we should end the two-party system?
Ending the two-party system.
I mean, the Republicans and the Democrats are big bullies, you know that, right?
Yes. Yes. And I think at first I didn't understand how much of a bully even like the Democratic Party is. But now that I've stepped in, I'm like, oh wow, y'all are no better. Like in the way that y'all treat minorities and young folks and poor folks. Wow, thank you for the warm welcome. I think that definitely allowing more voices at the table. So whether that's just completely reforming the parties, just inside out, just gut the whole thing, or allowing multiple parties to actually have more voices at the table, I think is key. I think that's definitely very, very important. So, I mean, I do know that there are systems in place and rules and policies in place that prevent third parties from having a seat at the table, whether it's appearing in debates, appearing on the ballot, getting airtime. I think that those are things that we need to really take a look at and say, why are they so dangerous? Or why do these two major parties view these third parties or independent parties as so dangerous? Is it the fact that they're dangerous to us as citizens, or is it the fact that they're dangerous to these two established parties?
Yeah,
And
right there.
Yes, exactly. And so I really am, like I said, because I am on that bandwagon of being really, I mean, not anti-establishment, but like just gutting it, gutting it and just rechanging and reimagining what it means to be. I mean, I think that my peoples, my Latino cultures, I'm like, we're the establishment, y'all. Like, I am 59% indigenous. Like, I am the establishment. Okay. I think that we definitely need to take a look at what it is that these two parties are trying to gatekeep and safeguard.
Yeah. So what about capitalism? Do we need to do away with capitalism?
Oh, that's I I would say yes. I'm going to say yes. Like I said, I'm very, very active with the Democratic Socialists of America, um, ATX and San Antonio, Texas chapter. I do find myself aligning more with like Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, even Elizabeth Warren, because I just think that. Uh, like I said, a lot of establishment and career politicians tend to fall more along the lines of moderate, and they fall along the party lines, and they fall within what the party wants. And what the party wants is a strategic play for strategic power. And and you know, folks don't have time, but folks don't have time or the ability um to waste on parties wanting to play for power. I'm just like, no, like people are out here literally dying in a pandemic by the millions, and y'all are still playing this as if it's a game. Like, excuse me, like my life and my family's lives and my neighbors' lives aren't a game. Like, I better see you out there like Bernie and AOC just fighting every single damn day hard, for us. And I have so much respect for that. So yeah, I would say that we have to get rid of capitalism. It's exploitative. It undermines the value of the worker, and it creates a division between the laborer and their what they produce. So like I am also big on creating a National Farm Workers Bill of Rights. I come from an entire family of immigrants, migrants. My mama worked in the fields, so she told me stories, and she cries when she tells me them, and it just breaks my heart about how like they used to spray pesticides over them as she was picking cotton and oranges and citrus and tomatoes. Um, they weren't allowed like bathroom breaks, so she would literally just have to like urinate on herself like as a teenage girl. They weren't given access to like sanitary pads either. And I'm just like, wow, like to me I can't think of anything worse than literally breaking your back covered like in urine and still being disrespected and not given like a fair shot or fair value, or seen as less valuable in the eyes of some individuals. It's yeah, I'm just I yeah. It hits very, very close to home for me, and that's why I'm so passionate about politics.
I agree with you on that. I voted for Bernie twice, and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Democratic Party screwed him twice.
Mhm.
And
Oh, I mean, they sure did, and
he
I
should
thought
be
that they would have
president.
learned their lesson,
Yeah.
but, they didn't.
It was amazing how Joe Biden just miraculously became a superstar overnight, wasn't it?
Oh,
Very
yeah. I
cool.
mean, that was definitely a surprise. I mean, even with, Hillary, to be honest, even then, that was a little bit of a surprise, just because I just saw and lived throughout all of the momentum and all of the excitement, and like I said, a lot of the times the areas that have raised me are forgotten, and at least the way that I lived through it was that Bernie's campaign specifically targeted those areas. And it wasn't like, just some cliche, just, a consultant came up with this work and, we're going to put it out there to make it look like we reached out to these constituents. It was like very, very personable, and very, very culturally and demographically appropriate type of outreach that was done and mobilization that was done. And so, yeah, that was definitely a big surprise.
And I imagine you will admit that racism, systemic racism is definitely a thing, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
There's no denying it. It's encoded in absolutely everything that we do. And you wouldn't think that, like, for example, like where hospitals are built, where fire and EMS stations are built, where water is privatized or not privatized. Um, it's all ingrained where your like trash dumps, like where your dumps are located, is technically a part of city code and city charter code that was written during racist periods, like during Jim Crow era, and it hasn't changed. And so yes, it is heavily ingrained in absolutely everything that we do. And I think those who are afraid to admit that, um, may be afraid to do so because they don't like the idea that they've helped perpetuate racism. Because nobody wants to be called a racist. Even a racist doesn't want to be called a racist. And I think that we're doing a disservice by not saying, like, hey, I'm learning something. I think that there's a lot of power and strength in saying, hey, I wasn't aware that, a hospital being built east of this major highway isn't happening because of code that was written during, Jim Crow era. Um, but I'm learning that now, and I want to learn with you. And I think that at the same time, the progressive party, or like progressive individuals, like I qualify myself as a progressive, we need to be much more kind and accepting to those who are still in that learning process. Sometimes that light bulb just doesn't go off for everybody at the same time. But if it's starting to, flicker a little bit, then I think the only way that we're really going to get it to like turn on and get them active along with other progressives is by welcoming them in and saying, hey, like, I'll educate you and I'm not going to demean you. I'm not going to be upset with you. um I want you to feel educated and feel empowered. So I also think that we need to be a little bit kinder sometimes in the way that we approach those who are still learning.
Yeah, I just don't get people that deny that systemic racism is a thing. I mean, I like to point out to them, our founding fathers made sure that only rich white men could vote for many, many years. And that's the foundation that everything else is built on. How can
Mhm.
it not be racist and classist and sexist, right?
Oh, it's it's just about every ist you can think
Yeah.
of. It's absolutely terrible, and I think that, look, see, what I just said is geared more towards those individuals who acknowledge that there is systemic racism ingrained in everything that we do, but for those who just flat out deny it, and unfortunately, have like I always tell people 50% of my family is very, very pro Trump. 50% of my family is very, very like pro Bernie. And both of those individuals raised me, like, and it's all culminated into who I am. And I still don't understand how they fail and how folks fail to acknowledge, like, hey, we are structured after a racist document. Like, we live in a just systemically, structurally, infrastructurally ingrained racist society, classist society. And there's nothing wrong with admitting that. We are not perfect. What makes us a more perfect union is our ability to recognize and see our imperfectness and to want to correct it.
So do you think white supremacy is the same conversation, or is that something else on a whole different level?
Oh, I mean, they're definitely tied. White supremacy, it came and was born out of these documents empowering rich white men. So they're tied to one another. You can't talk about ingrained racism without talking about white supremacy. I definitely think that it is a bigger threat to I think just toward democracy more so now that, after the January 6th insurrection on the Capitol, I think that that was clearly a show of white supremacy. You just you can't deny it. And I just think that you can't tackle one without tackling the other. And I think having a conversation about white supremacy, but not just white supremacy, but even white privilege, um, needs to be addressed. And I think there are minorities, and there definitely are minorities and groups out there who are doing the work of trying to educate people and push more resources forward to say, hey, this is an example. Here are some ways that we can, address that. Or here's some solutions or everyday things that we can practice to try to address white supremacy and white privilege. But I definitely think that white supremacy is a very, very big threat. I always, some people laugh when I tell them this, but like I feel much safer at car shows at Chicano Park here in Austin, Texas, than I do in like the rich white parts of Austin, like in Westlake or Bee Caves. Like I feel so much safer around my people.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Mhm.
So is there anything else you want people to know about you that I haven't given you an opportunity to say?
Um, I think a lot of individuals will run away from their mistakes and run away from all of the dark, ugly things like in their past. But I am a very open book, just because I feel that i- any mistakes that I have might have made in my past, I'm very open about the fact that I am a basically always in recovery sex addict. Because you don't really ever get over something like that. You're just kind of always in recovery.
I
I
wasn't expecting that.
Oh, yeah, but I just think that there is a lot, just the mentality sometimes surrounding addiction, any type of addiction. A lot of people will hide it or fear it. And I understand it's a protective mechanism, but I am not ashamed of who I am as an individual. Like I take Prozac every day. I'm a very, yeah, I'm a very, very open individual because I have found through whether it's like intensive outpatient therapy treatments that I've gone through, that we all have so much more in common. And at the core of who we all face the same issues. And so if I want to be a real leader, I think I do a disservice by acting perfect and by acting as if I'm some wonderful, amazing, upstanding role model who's never done a bad thing in her life. And so I want you all to know that I live my life out loud. I'm very transparent with everything that goes on in my life, with my views, and I aim to represent my district, my peoples, my constituents, in the same way, and be nothing but open and loving and communicative with all of you.
I already had a lot of admiration and respect for you, but after you giving that answer, I have a lot more. I want you to know that.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Um, I'm in recovery myself. I have 36 years clean and sober from alcohol and drugs. So,
Oh, congrats.
I'm only saying that because I want you to know that, there are people that are on your side when you admit that you have an addiction or trying to recover from addiction or whatever. There's lots of us out there. And yeah, I understand the stigma thing. Trust me.
Thank you for sharing that with me. I think that that's why I share what I do. That's why I'm so open to it, is because I want people to feel comfortable enough to share that information without feeling afraid or bearing some sort of stigma. Because I mean, the fact that you have been in recovery for so long, that is something, that's immediately makes me know that you are such a focused and diligent and strong individual. And so that is something to wear with a with pride, not with shame, with pride.
Thank you. Well, Claudia, I wish I was in Texas to vote for you.
Well,
Can I
thank
move out there before
you.
election time next year and vote for you?
Well, you're welcome to. We have a lot of new neighborhoods opening up in Hayes County, so come on over.
Well, Claudia, thank you very much for being my guest. I have truly enjoyed talking to you and meeting you. Tell us about your website. I want people to be able to get in contact with you.
Yes, so you can all reach me at my website, which is www.conclaudia.com. And it translates to withclaudia.com. You can also find me on social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at Poder con Claudia, which means we can with Claudia. And I look forward to seeing y'all, to chatting with y'all, and getting to know some of your listeners, Steve.
Thank you very much. And folks, be sure and check out Claudia. If you're in Texas District 35, give her your vote. I would love to vote for her. So,
Oh,
folks, thanks for tuning in to Holding On with Holder. Please subscribe to my channel and feel free to share this video all over social media. Claudia, I will let you go, and thank you very, very much for being my guest. I wish you all the best.
thank you so much, Steve. I look forward to chatting with you once I win the primary and we can revisit this whole combo.
Hey, reach out to me anytime you want an audience, okay?
I will. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.